The year is 1453, deep within the Ottoman Sultan's palace. A 12-year-old boy named Mehmet writhes in agony on a blood-soaked wooden table, his screams echoing through stone corridors that have witnessed this horror thousands of times before. The palace eunuch maker, known only as the cutter, approaches with a rusty blade still warm from the previous victim's blood. What you're about to witness is not just castration. It's systematic mutilation designed to create the perfect slave. The boy's wrists are bound with leather straps that cut deep into his flesh as he struggles against the inevitable. His legs are spread wide and held by two muscular guards whose faces show no emotion. They've seen this ritual so many times that a child's agony no longer registers as human suffering. The cutter raises his blade, and in one swift motion, slices through flesh and sinew, while the boy's scream pierces the air like a knife through silk. But this is just the beginning of his torment. What happens next is so brutal, so systematically cruel, that even hardened Ottoman soldiers sometimes fainted when forced to witness it. The wound is immediately cauterized with a red, hot iron rod, the smell of burning flesh mixing with the metallic scent of blood as smoke rises from the child's mutilated body. But here's what will truly shock you. This boy is one of the lucky ones. He will survive. Out of every 10 children subjected to this procedure, 7 will die within the next 72 hours from blood loss, infection, or shock. Their small bodies will be thrown into unmarked graves outside the palace walls, forgotten casualties in the Ottoman Empire's insatiable hunger for eunuch slaves. Tonight, I'm going to reveal 3 castration methods so horrific that they make modern torture look merciful. These aren't random acts of cruelty. They were systematic, legal, and practiced for thousands of years across every major civilization, from the precision knives of Chinese court eunuchs to the crushing stones of medieval Europe, from the burning sands of Arabian deserts to the frozen torture chambers of Russian monasteries. Men and boys faced mutilation that defied human comprehension. What you're about to learn has been hidden from history books, sanitized by scholars who couldn't bear to document the full horror. But the evidence remains in archaeological sites, medical texts, and the testimonies of survivors who lived to tell their nightmare. These methods weren't just about removing manhood. They were about creating a permanent class of broken humans who could never threaten the power structures that created them. If you think you can handle the darkest truths of human cruelty, stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see civilization forever. And if you're fascinated by history's most brutal secrets, subscribe now, because this is just the beginning of our journey into humanity's chamber of horrors. The first method takes us to ancient China, where castration became such a refined art that entire families specialized in the procedure for generations, passing down techniques that could determine whether a victim lived or died with surgical precision. But their methods went far beyond simple removal. They developed ways to keep victims conscious throughout procedures that could last for hours, turning mutilation into a form of live autopsy where the patient remained aware as their body was systematically destroyed. Picture the scene in the Forbidden City, 1680. The Qing dynasty has perfected the eunuch system, requiring thousands of castrated men to serve in the imperial court. In a small courtyard behind the palace kitchens, Master Liu prepares his instruments with the same care a surgeon might use today. But these tools aren't designed to heal. They're crafted specifically to mutilate with maximum precision and minimum mercy. The victim, a 14-year-old peasant boy sold by his starving family, lies naked on a wooden table that's been carved with channels to direct blood flow away from the workspace. His arms and legs are secured with silk ropes that seem gentle, but tighten like tourniquets when he struggles. Master Liu's assistants have spent 3 days preparing the boy's body, starving him to reduce blood pressure, feeding him special herbs that thin the blood, and forcing him to drink mixture that will keep him conscious no matter how much pain he endures. The Chinese method begins not with cutting, but with crushing. Master Liu takes a pair of wooden blocks, each one carved with precise grooves, and positions them around the boy's genitals. Slowly, methodically, he begins to compress them together. The crushing isn't meant to remove anything immediately. It's designed to destroy blood vessels and nerves gradually, ensuring that when the cutting begins, the victim will feel every slice but won't bleed to death. As the wooden vise tightens, you can hear the sound of cartilage compressing, the wet pop of blood vessels rupturing under pressure. The boy's screams reach a pitch that seems inhuman. But Master Lu continues his work with the patience of a craftsman. This crushing phase can last up to an hour, systematically destroying tissue layer by layer while keeping the victim's nervous system intact enough to feel everything that follows. Once the crushing is complete, Master Lu selects his knife, not a sharp surgical blade, but a deliberately dulled instrument that will tear rather than cut cleanly. The Chinese believed that clean cuts healed too quickly and didn't provide adequate punishment for whatever crime or circumstance brought the victim to this table. The knife work begins at the base, sawing through already damaged tissue with the slow persistence of someone carving wood, rather than operating on living flesh. But here's where Chinese castration becomes truly diabolical. They don't simply remove and cauterize. Instead, they insert a hollow reed into the urethra to prevent it from healing shut. Then pack the entire wound with a paste made from ground porcelain and animal fat. This mixture serves multiple purposes. It stops immediate bleeding while ensuring the wound will never heal properly, creating a permanent source of pain that will remind the victim of his status every day for the rest of his life. The survival rate for Chinese palace castration was approximately 30%, deliberately low because the Chinese court preferred their eunuchs to be marked by suffering. Those who survived the initial procedure faced months of recovery during which infection, fever, and constant pain were their only companions. Many who lived through the castration itself died weeks later from complications, their bodies slowly poisoned by the porcelain paste that was designed to prevent proper healing. Survivors described the sensation as having their entire pelvis filled with broken glass that shifted and cut with every movement. Walking became agony. Sitting was torture, and lying down provided no relief because the porcelain mixture created internal scar tissue that pulled and tore with every breath. Yet these broken men were considered the lucky ones. They had earned their place in the imperial court through surviving what most could not endure. The Chinese also developed seasonal variations of their technique. Winter castrations were performed in unheated rooms, where victims would be packed in snow after the procedure, the cold helping to control bleeding while inflicting additional torture through hypothermia. Summer castrations took place in rooms heated to extreme temperatures, causing excessive bleeding and dehydration that pushed the survival rate even lower. Archaeological evidence from the Forbidden City includes thousands of small bronze knives, wooden crushing blocks, and ceramic containers that once held the porcelain paste. Medical texts from the Ming Dynasty describe the procedure in clinical detail, noting that successful eunuch makers could gauge a victim's survival chances by the color of their blood and the pitch of their screams during the crushing phase. But Chinese precision pales in comparison to what awaited victims in medieval Europe, where castration wasn't just about creating servants. It was about divine punishment that combined religious fervor with scientific cruelty in ways that pushed human suffering to its absolute limits. The year is 1348 in a monastery outside Florence. Brother Augustine, once a proud knight who made the mistake of seducing a nobleman's wife, now faces punishment that will serve as both personal penance and public warning. The monks who surround him aren't healers, but specially trained torturers who believe that suffering purifies the soul, and they've developed techniques to maximize both physical agony and spiritual terror. Medieval European castration wasn't performed by skilled specialists like in China. Instead, it was carried out by religious authorities who viewed the procedure as a form of holy torture that should be as painful and humiliating as possible. The goal wasn't just to remove sexual capacity, but to break the victim's will so completely that they would become perfect examples of submission to divine authority. Brother Augustine is dragged to the monastery's punishment chamber, a stone room beneath the chapel, where the screams of victims provide a counterpoint to the prayers being chanted above. He's stripped naked and forced to lie on a wooden cross, his arms and legs spread wide and nailed to the wood with iron spikes that penetrate bone and sinew. This isn't just restraint, it's the beginning of a process designed to recreate Christ's suffering, while adding uniquely medieval innovations in human cruelty. The monk responsible for the castration, Brother Torquemada, approaches with a leather bag containing instruments that look more like torture devices than medical tools. Medieval castration used what they called the crushing stones method, two specially carved rocks that had been blessed by the church and heated in a fire until they glowed red with divine wrath. Brother Augustine can feel the heat radiating from the stones before they even touch his flesh. When Brother Torquemada positions them around his genitals, the searing pain causes him to struggle against the nails that hold him to the cross, each movement driving the iron spikes deeper into his hands and feet. The monks watching this spectacle begin to chant Latin prayers, turning the castration into a religious ceremony where human agony becomes worship. The crushing begins slowly, the heated stones applied with just enough pressure to burn flesh without immediately destroying it. Medieval Europeans believed that slow torture was more spiritually purifying than quick mutilation, so they developed techniques that could extend the castration process for hours while keeping the victim conscious and aware. The stones are gradually pressed together, the heat cauterizing blood vessels while simultaneously crushing bone and cartilage in a process that combines the worst aspects of burning alive with systematic mutilation. As the crushing continues, Brother Augustine's screams turn into prayers, then into animal howls, then into silence as his body goes into shock from the combination of burning, crushing, and crucifixion. But the monks have prepared for this. They splash cold water on his face to revive him, force wine mixed with stimulants down his throat, and use smelling salts to ensure he remains conscious throughout the entire procedure. The medieval method didn't end with crushing. Once the stones had destroyed the external organs, the monks would use red, hot iron rods to burn out the internal portions, creating wounds that extended deep into the body cavity. This wasn't surgical precision. It was deliberate over-mutilation designed to cause maximum internal damage while keeping the victim alive long enough to appreciate the full extent of his punishment. But here's where medieval castration becomes truly barbaric. They would then sew the victim back onto the cross and leave him there for 3 days, the same duration Christ spent on the cross. During this time, Brother Augustine would hang naked and mutilated while monks and visitors came to observe his suffering and contemplate the wages of sin. Food and water were provided in tiny amounts, just enough to prevent death, but insufficient to provide any comfort. The infection rate for medieval castration was nearly 100%, because the procedure was designed to create wounds that couldn't heal properly. The combination of burning, crushing, and exposure to unsanitary conditions ensured that even survivors would face months of agony as their bodies tried to repair damage that had been inflicted with the specific intent of preventing recovery. Survivors of medieval castration described the sensation as having their entire lower body filled with molten metal that never cooled. The combination of burn wounds, crushed bone, and infected tissue created pain so intense that many victims lost their minds entirely, spending their remaining years babbling incoherently about fire and stones and the sound of monks chanting over their screams. Medieval monasteries kept detailed records of these procedures, documenting not just the techniques used, but also the victims' responses to different types and intensities of torture. These records reveal that the monks experimented with various methods, timing different phases of the mutilation to coincide with religious holidays and adjusting their techniques based on the victim's social status and perceived level of sin. But even medieval European creativity seems tame compared to what developed in the Arabian desert, where castration evolved into a form of art that combined extreme environmental conditions with surgical techniques designed to create the most expensive and prized slaves in the ancient world. The scorching sun of the Sahara Desert beats down mercilessly as a caravan stops at an oasis that serves as one of history's most horrific processing centers. Here, in the middle of nowhere, Slave traders have established a castration facility that operates with the efficiency of a modern factory and the cruelty of a medieval torture chamber. The victims are young African boys, captured during raids and transported across hundreds of miles of desert to reach this place where their humanity will be surgically removed. The Arabian method developed not from religious fervor or imperial bureaucracy, but from pure economic calculation. Eunuch slaves commanded prices 10 times higher than intact males, but only if the castration was performed with techniques that created specific types of damage, while ensuring survival rates high enough to make the procedure profitable. This led to innovations in surgical torture that pushed the boundaries of human endurance, while maximizing the economic value of human suffering. Master Hassan, the chief castrator at this desert facility, has spent 30 years perfecting techniques that can determine not just whether a victim survives, but what type of eunuch they become. Different markets demanded different types of mutilation. Byzantine courts preferred total castration. North African harems wanted partial removal, and certain Middle Eastern markets paid premium prices for victims who had been castrated using methods that left them in constant pain. The boy chosen for today's demonstration is perhaps 10 years old, his dark skin already scarred from the whips used to drive the slave caravan across the desert. He's been without food or water for 3 days, not as cruelty, but as preparation that will reduce blood pressure and make the upcoming procedure slightly more survivable. Master Hassan's assistants have also fed him a mixture of desert plants that will keep him conscious, while reducing his body's ability to go into shock. The Arabian method begins with burial. The boy is forced into a hole in the sand that's been dug to precise specifications, deep enough that only his head remains above ground, but positioned so that his body is compressed in a way that restricts blood flow to his lower extremities. The sand isn't just covering. It's been heated by the desert sun to temperatures that would normally cause severe burns, but the compression prevents the boy from moving away from the heat. As the heated sand presses against his body, Master Hassan begins the castration using a technique that combines cutting with controlled burning. His knife has been heated in a fire until it glows red, then allowed to cool just enough that it won't immediately cauterize every cut. This creates wounds that bleed controlled amounts while simultaneously searing nerve endings, producing pain that registers as both cutting and burning sensations occurring simultaneously. The Arabian technique involves removing tissue in stages rather than all at once. Master Hassan makes the first cut, then pauses to allow the victim to experience the full intensity of pain, before making the second cut in a different location. This process can take hours, with each cut precisely calculated to cause maximum suffering while avoiding damage that would lead to immediate death. But here's where Arabian castration becomes uniquely horrible. They use the desert environment as part of the torture. Between cuts, Master Hassan pours heated sand directly into the open wounds, the individual grains acting like thousands of tiny burning particles that penetrate deep into the tissue. The sand serves multiple purposes. It helps control bleeding, prevents the wounds from healing too quickly, and creates a grinding sensation that continues long after the cutting is finished. The boy's screams attract vultures that circle overhead, their shadows providing brief moments of relief from the sun, while serving as reminders of what happens to those who don't survive the procedure. Master Hassan times his work to coincide with the hottest part of the day, when the combination of surgical trauma and extreme heat pushes the victim's body to the very edge of survival. As the castration continues, assistants pour small amounts of brackish water over the boy's head, not enough to provide real relief, but sufficient to prevent death from dehydration. This water has been deliberately contaminated with salt and other minerals that will be absorbed through the scalp and increase the body's stress response, making every sensation more intense while preventing the mercy of unconsciousness. The final stage of Arabian castration involves packing the wounds with a mixture of sand, animal fat, and ground glass that's been blessed by Islamic clerics and infused with herbs that prevent proper healing. This mixture ensures that survivors will face months of agony as their bodies try to expel foreign materials while forming scar tissue around particles of glass that will shift and cut with every movement for the rest of their lives. Master Hassan completes his work as the sun begins to set, leaving the boy buried in sand with his wounds packed and sealed. He will remain in this position for 3 days, the time it takes to determine whether the castration was successful. During this period, he'll be fed small amounts of water mixed with drugs that prevent infection, while ensuring he remains conscious enough to feel every grain of sand grinding against his wounds. The survival rate for Arabian desert castration was approximately 40%, higher than medieval European methods, but still low enough that the procedure remained profitable only because of the premium prices paid for survivors. Those who lived through the 3-day burial period would be dug up and examined for signs of infection before being transported to slave markets where they would be sold to buyers who valued them specifically because they had survived such extreme torture. Archaeological evidence from desert oasis sites includes thousands of small graves containing the remains of boys who didn't survive castration, their skeletons showing evidence of the crushing, cutting, and burning that characterize the Arabian method. Medical texts from medieval Islamic scholars describe the procedure in clinical terms, while noting that successful castrators could determine survival chances by observing the color and consistency of blood during different phases of the mutilation. But perhaps most disturbing are the accounts left by survivors, men who lived for decades after their desert castration and wrote detailed descriptions of the ongoing pain caused by glass particles embedded in scar tissue. They describe the sensation as carrying a permanent reminder of their torture, sharp crystals that would shift and cut whenever they moved, ensuring that they never forgot the day their humanity was surgically removed in the burning sands of the Sahara. As our journey through history's most brutal castration methods comes to an end, we must confront the uncomfortable truth that these weren't aberrations or examples of primitive barbarity. They were sophisticated, systematic, and legal procedures that were considered normal and necessary by the civilizations that practiced them. From the precision workshops of imperial China to the religious torture chambers of medieval Europe, from the desert processing centers of Arabia to countless other locations where human suffering was transformed into economic and social control, castration represented humanity's capacity for calculated cruelty. These methods weren't designed simply to remove sexual capacity. They were engineered to break human spirits while creating permanent classes of damaged people who would serve as living reminders of what happened to those who transgressed social, religious, or political boundaries. The survival rates were deliberately kept low because the trauma of the procedure was considered as important as its physical results. The victims weren't just statistics, they were individual human beings whose lives were destroyed by techniques that combined surgical precision with psychological torture. Each boy who died screaming in a Chinese palace, each man who was crucified and mutilated in a European monastery, each child who was buried alive in Arabian sand was a person with hopes and dreams that were systematically destroyed by societies that viewed human suffering as both entertainment and social control. What makes these historical horrors relevant today is the recognition that the impulses that created them, the desire to control through fear, to maintain power through systematic cruelty, to transform human bodies into symbols of authority. These impulses haven't disappeared from human nature. They've simply found new expressions in different times and places. The archaeological evidence, the medical texts, the survivor accounts all tell the same story. When societies decide that certain groups of people are expendable, when cruelty becomes institutionalized and systematic, when human suffering is transformed into entertainment or economic opportunity, the results are horrors that challenge our understanding of what it means to be human. Remember these victims not as cautionary tales about the price of transgression, but as human beings who deserved better from their societies. Their screams echoed through palaces and monasteries and desert outposts, but their stories survive as warnings about what happens when civilizations lose sight of basic human dignity. If this exploration of history's darkest secrets has shocked you as much as it should, subscribe for more brutal truths that textbooks refuse to tell. Hit that notification bell because there are countless more stories of systematic cruelty waiting to be uncovered, and every one of them carries lessons we ignore at our own peril. The past is never truly past. It lives on in the institutions we build, the power structures we accept, and the ways we treat those who have no power to resist. These castration methods may be historical, but the mindset that created them survives wherever human cruelty is systematized, normalized, and justified by those who benefit from others' suffering.